Hello, everyone. It's your host, your boy, Jet Black, the one and only, here with another exciting live stream. Give me one moment to get the live chat up. That way, I'll be able to talk with you all while we do the stream. Well, hope everyone's having a wonderful day today. Today is Friday. So, like last Friday, we're going to do a WT Friday or a What the Friday. What the Friday videos are essentially where I talk about a really weird topic. And I more or less just discuss that with you all, and you all can talk back with me in the live chat. It can have a lot of audience interaction. It can have no audience interaction. It all depends on how much you guys get invested in the topic or have an interest in the topic being discussed. And of course, if no one talks and interacts during the stream, that doesn't mean that we can't have interaction after the stream in the comment section below. So, as the title suggests, this video is going to be about weird research, comic books, and modern mythology. So I wanted to start off by essentially giving a definition of what mythology is. So mythology is a collection of myths, especially one belonging to a particular religious or cultural tradition. Then I wanted to give a quick definition of what a myth is. We're going to go with the first definition. So a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. In most cases, when we talk about myths and mythology, we're talking about something like the gods, for example, Thor from Norse mythology. But as of recent, a lot of talk has been put into the concept of modern mythology. And when referring to modern mythology, many people will go as far as to say that comic books really encapsulate the modern myth. And there are even headlines in the news that say things like, comic book superheroes, the gods of modern mythology. So it's definitely become like a pretty big idea, like the idea that superheroes are essentially like the new myths and that comics are the new myths. But if we go back to the definition of what a myth is, you can see how that relates, but also see how that doesn't fully connect. So comic books essentially are like a story that takes place over the course of many years. It builds, it has a lot of lore, it has supernatural beings and supernatural events, but it doesn't necessarily concern the early history of a people or explain natural or social phenomenon. I always feel like that's where comic books don't really fall entirely into the idea of being a myth, because I see the connections, the similarities that I just described, but without that, I feel like it's more just a story rather than a myth. But that's where I want to jump into the concept of the weird research that I've been looking into. So there are a set of authors who I can't really pronounce their names. I believe it's Kozlowski and Kozlowska for their last names. Yo, Unknown Slayer, welcome to the stream. It's good to have you. Unknown Slayer said Balder. Balder is another Norse mythological character. It's good to have you. The Kozlowskis and Kozlowskas have done a series of research papers that I've been reading over. And a lot of those seem to be more like modern mythology, in my opinion, than comic books. They seem to tell a narrative about a couple of researchers who have been discovering how the soul works and how the soul works in relation to the universe and how the universe began and how the universe will end. Keep in mind, I take all the research they write with a grain of salt. They are written in peer-reviewed research papers, and they are all research that has been written within the last few years, the range being from like 2016 to 2018, talking about consciousness and the universe and everything like that. And apparently their history for writing books goes even farther beyond that, with a book that was written as recent as May 24th of this year, and then going farther back with their bibliography of books written since then. So they definitely have been publishing a lot, but I want to focus mainly on their research papers, mainly because I feel like when your papers get peer reviewed, that simply means that other scientists that are focused in the same field as you are essentially saying, yes, I believe that like what they're saying has credence and is worth being published. So I feel like it's more important to look at these because essentially they're being vetted by other scientists as saying like, hey, you know, I think they're on to something, rather than books, which you can just kind of freely publish to Amazon. I have books on Amazon, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that hard for you to just publish wherever you want here. And they charge a lot of money too. You can get this in a paperback for $195. It's crazy. That must be a really good book. But the reason why these feel more like modern mythology, in my opinion, than like a comic book, is because they talk about stuff like the binding energy of the human brain, that is focused on in a lot of these papers, like Human Brain and the Cosmos. So the paper Human Brain and the Cosmos talks about how the binding energy of the human brain takes up most of the mass of the human brain. I think they go as far as to try and say like over 90% of the human brain's mass. Apologies. I am currently stationed somewhere where I can't control stuff like this. So the phone's ringing in the background. I'm just going to give it some time. I imagine someone will answer it. There we go. So the binding energy of the human brain takes up more than 90% of its mass. And the concept behind it, they feel, is that this binding energy is what makes up the mind or the soul of like a human. And when you die, the binding energy of the human brain emits out. So it's like your soul leaving your body. Now you may be wondering, how do they come to the conclusion that this binding energy is like your soul or your mind or your consciousness? And honestly, in my opinion, it's not fully clear. You know, they just kind of end up saying it in a paper. If we take a look at one of their papers, right, like what these papers actually look like, it's a few statements. You know, you may get like a few paragraphs or so. And then as you scroll through, it just ends up becoming like math, just a bunch of math with a bunch of variables. And they just start talking about the math for a good bit. And then you'll see some graphs, and then you'll get to like a really dramatic conclusion where they say one can conclude by analogy that our space with background radiation was created in the interaction of timeless conscious with void. And you're like, what? Like, what are you even talking about? Unknown Slayer said, sorry, I have to go. I promise to watch this later. It's good. It's good UFO stuff like this, like history, other stuff. Bye. Okay, thank you kindly, Unknown Slayer. I'm glad that you're enjoying the content. And yeah, make sure to tune in later if you would like to. Also, sorry about the background. Like I said, there are certain things that are just outside of my control. Just took a quick sip of juice. So I feel like this kind of thing is really interesting because just like a comic book, you can follow it throughout multiple years, throughout time. You, like a myth, actually have them trying to explain some natural or social phenomena. In this case, the soul, the universe, the end of the universe. They go as far as to say that consciousness's interaction with the void formed the universe, and that they gave like a time point for one of these things. Like they set up like an apocalyptic myth, right? So let me see if I can find the apocalyptic myth and show it to you. So I know the title of it. It's something like On the Evolution of the Universe Towards Consciousness. So the apocalyptic myth says like in 10 to the 40th years, which is a 1 with 40 zeros at the end, that the universe is going to only be consciousness and void. And then once that happens, the universe will reform, because they argue that consciousness plus the void is what made the universe in the first place. So essentially they're saying that the universe is cyclical, and that every time the universe ends, it will just start again. And there are other myths that I've read, like actual myths that have like a similar concept of that eternal return, where it just keeps coming back. And like I said, there's a lot of writing in this one versus a lot of the other ones where it's hard math. It just hits you with math, but it still hits you with math eventually. You never get to avoid all that math, trust. But they have essentially this argument at the very end Yeah, when they say consciousness is the spirit of the universe, it invites and directs the universe to the end slash new beginning for the next 10 to the 40 years. And it's like, what? This is pretty crazy. You know what I mean? But I dig it. If you're interested in reading any of these, by the way, it's not that hard to search it on Google Scholar, especially if you know the name of them. So the search terms are you put consciousness in quotes, then the author is M. Kozlowski, and then they like to publish in a particular peer-reviewed journal. So source journal, source of source consciousness. Weird search terms, but it's essentially they like to publish in the Journal for Consciousness Research and Exploration, or JSER. And they've been publishing in that journal for years. It's peer-reviewed, which means it is being looked over by other professionals in the field who are saying, yes, this is worth publishing. But I like that it kind of tells a narrative of these researchers as they're trying to wrap their heads around these incredibly advanced concepts through math, and somehow coming to these like really crazy and elaborate conclusions that I personally don't understand. It just goes over my head, a lot of the math stuff. But their conclusions seem very blunt, though. They'll just kind of say, yes, the soul is the binding energy of the brain. And yes, that does come from consciousness. And yes, the consciousness is what makes the universe and what keeps remaking the universe. It's really heavy stuff. But I do feel like this is more of a reflection of modern mythology than, say, like a comic book, because a comic book doesn't try to explain the natural world. Now, when it comes to explaining societal phenomena, I feel like comic books are pretty good about that. Comic books are good about being reflections of the times that they're written in and being more flexible on that. If you read comic books throughout the years and compare older versions of characters to modern characters, you're not only seeing a change in those characters over time, but you're also seeing a change in the culture of the world and the world's people over time. So I do feel like comic books work really well as the modern myth when it comes to, moving to the correct tab, social phenomena. I feel like it works really well. But when it comes to explaining like events in nature, I feel like something like the work of Kozlowski and Kozlowska really works well as a myth. It feels more like reading a story about what makes up reality rather than reading like a research paper, until you get to the weird math stuff. Weird math stuff throws me every time. Also, we know that they're publishing these research papers like nonstop, you know, multiple that come from the same year, which shows that within a year, they're like pumping out these papers, like multiple at once. And we also know that they're like actively writing and publishing all these books that you see here. And there are more books on another page. So, I mean, they're going hard. It almost looks like they're trying to load more at the bottom of this page, which I don't know why. They have a next page button. But yeah, like 19 results for books. So they've written like 19 books. And then here's their webpage. I don't understand why their webpage looks like it was made in like the early 90s and never updated. Especially when its last update was in 2006. Web pages didn't look like this in 2006, unless you just did nothing to it. I find this weird. Even if you don't consider any of the other things I've described in this weird so far, I feel like this is like one of the weirdest things. Like, this is a very plain web page. Just got a sip of juice. But yeah, I am actually really curious about the viewers' thoughts. What are your thoughts on the modern myth, on superheroes being a part of the modern myth, the concept that research could be considered a part of modern mythology? I do feel like a lot of people would disagree with the concept of research being modern mythology. they would argue that it doesn't really tell a story, that it's not like an actual narrative. But I feel like a big part of it that makes it feel more like a narrative is that in most cases, these papers refer back to other papers written by the same authors, and essentially they'll talk about their previous work. It creates a continuity between the different papers throughout years. So you get to see the narrative unfold when they go, oh, we've discovered the binding energy of the human brain. Oh, we believe that it's a part of consciousness. Oh, consciousness is this fifth force of reality. Oh, consciousness in reaction to the void creates the universe. And in reaction to the human brain is what makes binding energy. And oh man, the universe is going to exist for so many years, and then it stops, and then it starts back again. It's a cycle. You know, all these things are concepts that I'm used to only seeing in the realm of myth and not seeing in like the casual realm of science. You know, you wouldn't expect to go on to like a New Scientist or turn on like the Discovery Channel and for them to say any of those things. You know what I mean? It definitely feels fringe. Some would immediately call it pseudoscience. You know what I mean? But it does have that hard mythology feel. And when I read it, at least personally, I feel like it has more of a standpoint in being modern mythology than comic books have at being modern mythology. Comic books don't always feel like myths, I guess is the thing. Because some of them aren't saying anything really about social phenomena or explaining social phenomena, like how people behave and how people act. Some feel more like raw entertainment that don't have a necessary greater statement about like who we are as a people. But yeah, I have been like debating whether or not I was going to do this for What the Fridays. It's hard to compete with Long Furby. I thought the Long Furby was pretty weird. And that came out at a good time. And that Zootopia abortion comic was unexpected, especially the idea that it like is a meme as well. So it kind of was popularized a little bit. And Long Furby was also a meme. So I guess this is the first What the Friday that's not a meme per se, or at least it's not like a popularized meme. But I guess I wanted to put something out there that I didn't think anyone else would be really paying attention to, that I personally thought was weird. And also, you know, I always love to talk comics, so let me talk comics. I like this kind of research, but I rarely get to talk about it, so it gave me a chance to do it on the channel. Plus, it'll give me the chance to see what you all think about this kind of thing. And what did you think of this content? Do you think it was kind of bland? Do you think it went on too long? What are your thoughts? What would you like to see more of? And did any of these topics, by the way, on this article page catch your attention? They seem to have a lot of weird stuff where they talk about the moon in relation to like human consciousness, which I think is weird. They have stuff that talks about cancer and the concept that tumors have their own consciousness. So that's weird too. So if any of that pops out at you and you're like, man, you know, why wasn't the whole What the Friday about those things? Those things were really weird and worth discussion, then definitely hit me up. A matter of fact, here are a few like pitches, like ideas for what I could say in relation to those, and just tell me if they sound like they're worth having like entire videos to themselves. In relation to cancer, like tumors having their own consciousness and that consciousness talking back to the host that has the tumor, I could probably do a video where I talked about Deadpool, and I tried to connect Deadpool and him having multiple consciousnesses in his head that he talks to, but also Deadpool being a superhero whose superpower is essentially just having like mutant cancer, and relating it back to the concept of cancer having consciousness that talks to the host kind of thing. So that's just an idea that comes off the top of my head on that. I could do a video where I talked about a superhero called Moon Knight. Moon Knight is a superhero who believes that he gets his powers from like a moon god or whatever, in relation to the concept of human beings and our consciousness having evolved from the moon, which is another big thing that they like to talk about. That moon stuff comes up in more than just this particular paper. But this paper has it like in the title, which is why I keep looking at that one. But yeah, tell me what you guys think. If you'd be interested in seeing more of this, do you agree with any of the things I said? Do you disagree with any of the things I said? Do you think this was weird enough to be a WT Friday? Just tell me in the live chat or in the comment section below. But thank you all for watching. If you like this video, make sure to smash that like button, favorite, comment, subscribe, and ding, ding, ding. Ring that notification bell to be notified whenever we do these live streams. This is your host, your friend, your boy, Jeff, like the one and only, logging out. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.